So today we're joined by Asn Ndiaye from Northern California Land Trust, Matt Gustafson from Bay Area Community Land Trust, and Regina Mouton, who is a current resident and former board member of Bay Area CLT. So speaking first today, we have Asn, who is the Executive Director of NCLT and a dedicated advocate for housing justice and climate equity. Asn previously served as the California Housing and Climate Campaign Manager at Power Switch Action, where he led campaigns to advocate for climate equity and housing justice, and as a fellow with Partnership for the Bay's Future, working to address displacement through innovative housing solutions in San Jose. So I'll pass it to Asn to get us started.
All right. Hi, folks, and thanks so much for that really great introduction, Lavender. If we can go to the next slide. So I'm the somewhat newish now executive director of the Northern California Land Trust. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about NCLT, then give an overview of the basics of land trusts, and then talk about the benefits and challenges of this model. And I'll actually highlight the growth of this model in the last few years. So just to start off, I want to introduce my organization. The Northern California Land Trust is the oldest and one of the largest land trusts in the country. We're just over 50 years young. We were founded in 1973, and we currently have properties in 4 counties and 6 cities throughout the Bay Area. But we have a pretty deep concentration in South Berkeley and North Oakland. Our mission is to incubate, provide, and support permanently affordable housing projects throughout the Bay Area. Next slide. So now is just a really quick overview of what community land trusts are. Obviously, I won't be able to get into the complete nitty-gritty of it, but this is just going to be a really basic introduction. Next slide. So at its core, what a community land trust is a nonprofit organization that is guided by residents and community members. They create permanently affordable housing in addition to other community benefits by owning and stewarding land in perpetuity. To put that more plainly, it's a tool to preserve affordability to meet community needs. And it's usually housing. Most community land trusts are really based around housing, but as we'll see, it's a flexible and innovative tool for all sorts of purposes. The way that it works is that it separates the ownership of the land, which is kept in trust in perpetuity, and the improvements, which is rented or sold at an affordable price. The ground lease, the thing in the middle, which is kind of the baseline of all community land trust, is the mechanism that allows for that affordability benefit to be preserved for successive ownerships, for not the first owner, the second, but in perpetuity. Next slide. So CLTs promote all kinds of affordable housing. So it's not only single family homes, which I think for a lot of folks who know about community land trust, that's kind of what they usually think about is land trust owning the land and then usually a single family home being on top of it. But it's for any kind of housing situation, including limited equity co-ops, condominiums, and multifamily rentals. Next slide. But it can also be used, as I mentioned, to drive other community needs, whether that's urban agriculture, small businesses, preserving open spaces, or having affordable meeting and community spaces. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about some of the benefits and the challenges of CLTs, and I'm sure this is something that we're going to be able to dive into during the Q&A section as well. Next slide. I'm just realizing now there's a lot of text in a very small amount of real estate, so I'll try to go over it somewhat slowly. Obviously, as I mentioned, probably the biggest and most important thing about community land trusts is that it is really, really big on perpetuity and keeping properties affordable, not only the first time, so it doesn't have to set out of that lottery effect, but also for the next family and the next family and the next family, and makes homes become kind of community assets. The next thing is that it fosters generational longevity, and this is actually something that is really important for us here in South Berkeley and in North Oakland, where we have multi-generational, a lot of African American families. And CLT home ownership is really a way to be able to transfer generational wealth and being able to keep families here in the Bay Area. That also includes, of course, for folks who are deciding to move on from CLT homeownership, they're able to take equity with them and potentially move to other types of housing. And then finally, something that we really emphasize, especially because our land trust is really focused on concentration, is a concentration of CLTs, a neighborhood level strategy, really creates a community level affordability and creates community assets to drive affordability at the neighborhood level as well. Some of the challenges that land trusts really encounter is that our model goes really deep, right? As folks know, we engage with our residents, we have training and support. For my land trust, I know every single one of our residents by name. That requires a significant amount of resources in time, in supports, in partnerships, which obviously is a very, very expensive endeavor and is not always funded. And then, of course, the second big thing that is a huge challenge for community land trusts is that we have lower access to funding sources. As folks know, compared to other traditional affordable housing developers, we really focus on preserving affordability. As one really, really great paper called it, catching affordability where it's at. And that obviously sort of limits our ability to get funding, as we don't usually focus on ground up construction, though that is not one of our limitations overall. Next slide. So we're going to talk about the growth of CLTs, really evidenced by the turnout today. There's been growing interest and growth in the community land trust across the country and the state. Next slide. So we are currently up to 50 CLTs at the state level. That's a huge growth. We were only at about 30, not even 10 years ago. So this is really just exponential growth. Overall, we're at about 1,600 units of housing statewide, with over 3,500 residents, 1,200 plus general members. Those are community members who are involved in supporting and investing in CLTs. And we have 175 plus board members. And I just want to say asterisk that these numbers may already be out of date, as I hear of new land trusts bubbling up every single day. And that's it for me. I'm going to pass it back to Lindsay.
Thanks, Asn. Really appreciate that overview on NCLT's work and also our affordable housing, or sorry, and Community Land Trust 101. I had a few questions I wanted to ask you if you're up for that. Great. So you mentioned that you're still the semi-new-ish executive director. I can relate. And you recently had your 1-year anniversary. Congratulations. That's a big milestone. I was wondering if you could share with us what some of your biggest accomplishments have been since you've joined the organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think making it a whole year, I think is probably the first of these accomplishments. I'm glad I've made it this far. So the first couple of things are just really like internal things. So I don't know if they apply to every other land trust, but really trying to get just better systems in place for our organization, try to find ways to be more efficient as an organization. And the second thing is just really stabilize our finances and just make sure that we become a more sustainable organization. Things that are, I think, really, really great sort of milestones, or have been big milestones for us. First, very recently, we were selected to be part of the third cohort of the Partnership for the Bay's Future in a partnership with the city of Pinole. We completed one at the end of December, but we're currently engaged in 3 rehabilitation projects, which have been long promised to our residents, and they're going to make our property safer and more energy efficient. And we were the recipient of a $1 million 3-year grant from the City Foundation, which is called the Community Progress Makers Grant. We're really glad about it because it also comes with a lot of training and wraparound services to help us better understand how we're going to be sustainable as an organization, especially in this kind of really challenging nonprofit environment.
Well, you have been busy in your first year. That's amazing. And particularly, congratulations on the award from City. I know that was a super competitive, nationwide open call for grant potential grantees. So congratulations on that. So I know that prior to NCLT, you held a lot of various kind of research and policy positions, including being a fellow with the Partnership for the Bay's Future Fellowship Program yourself. So I was wondering how you've been able to kind of incorporate your previous, policy and research experience, now that you're more in this like practitioner role at NCLT.
Yeah, absolutely. So NCLT, one of the things that NCLT does is do advocacy, and they've been part of local, regional, and statewide campaigns for funding locally here in Berkeley for TOPA, Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, and at the statewide level, helped write and pass the state legislation that allows for land trusts to purchase homes that go into foreclosure because of go into investor-owned homes that go into foreclosure. Now that I've come on board, one of the things that I think I want to really bring is show how the land trust model can be part of system level change, right? Not just one home, not just one community, but for an entire city, region, and state. And really try to figure out ways to embed the principles of community ownership, that is stability, greater decision making, wealth building, equity building, and permanence. Really bringing in that idea that folks are going to be able to remain in their communities, and try to figure out how do we embed that into our state housing policy and the way that we fund housing here in the state.
Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned this already, and I was so excited to see that NCLT is partnering with the City of Pinole and the Richmond Community Foundation, and is the recipient from the Partnership for the Bay's Future in the form of a fellow who I believe is with us today, Jared. Shout out to Jared. And he'll be working with you over the next 2 years, and I think he's just a few weeks into that fellowship. Spoiler alert, we are going to have an Affordable Housing Month event in May with the Partnership for the Bay's Future, going over all 5 of the current fellows who have been placed in the East Bay, and also some of the former East Bay projects through the fellowship program. But before the event takes place in May for Affordable Housing Month, I was wondering if you could share just a little bit more about that project.
Yeah, absolutely. And also shout out to Jared, who I know is on the call. And we're super happy to be working with him and working with the City of Pinole and Lily over there at the housing department in that city. We have a property in Pinole, which is how we got connected to Pinole. And what we're interested in is that we found out that a lot of our residents here in Berkeley, community members, were moving out to Contra Costa County because they were seeking more affordability. Of course, as that's happening, that's going to drive greater displacement pressures for those smaller cities out in western and eastern Contra Costa County. So we're trying to figure out a solution, potentially, most likely with community ownership options, for figuring out ways to stabilize and capture that affordability as it exists currently. Working with the city, we're looking at ways that we can really address not only affordability, but also blight by partnering with the Richmond Community Foundation to invest money from a social housing bond to acquire and rehab blighted properties and sell them affordably to residents. One thing that I've actually heard really recently was that especially blighted homes or abandoned homes have an effect on property values throughout the entire street, entire neighborhood. And for us to be able to address kind of these, what you would call sort of problem properties and bring in families into those properties, where we can really see how this is going to impact the entire neighborhood and block in Pinole. So we're really excited about that program. We're also going to be working on helping to develop a new policy for affordable housing fund in the city. So I'm really, really excited about these changes. One of the big things that we really want to do is pilot these programs so that they can be replicated for other cities roughly the size of Pinole. More than half of the Bay Area lives in cities with a population of less than 60,000 people. And so these smaller cities really need to figure out strategies and solutions to drive housing affordability.
So exciting. I can't wait to learn more about the progress over these next 2 years. Please consider an EBHO a resource. And I was really excited to see that Pinole took advantage of this opportunity to apply with you for a fellow, because like you said, I think it could have larger repercussions beyond just Pinole itself. It can really serve as a model for other jurisdictions. And this kind of reminding me of my days working for the city of New York right after during the mortgage foreclosure crisis.
Slightly larger.
Yeah, 2010 or so, right? So, and the neighborhood stabilization program that was put into place there, which of course was a large federal program, but the principles were the same. It's tried to take over, blighted and real estate owned single or family homes or small homes and convert them, in this case, it wasn't a land trust model, but into affordable housing. So super excited to see progress in Pinole. And then I have one last question for you. You also alluded to this. So community land trusts seem to be totally in right now. Our partner organization in Santa Clara County, SV at Home, is hosting you tomorrow. So if you haven't had enough of Asn after today, you can see them again tomorrow as part of their policy and action series. That's also free and open to the public and will be virtual. And I also noticed, because I was perusing the Housing California agenda, there's a big conference happening in Sacramento next week called Housing California that really brings together people from all over the state who are working on affordable housing issues. And you are on a panel there called Regional Community Land Trust Solidarity, Scaling the Impact of CLTs Across California. So I'm just wondering, what is causing this CLT craze? Is it you? Is it that you're just so popular everybody wants to invite you to their party and their panels? Or do you think there's a larger thing going on here where people are just having this increased interest in community land trusts?
I'm gonna go ahead and go out on a limb, but assume it's not me. That it's not my charm that's driving all of this. My sense, and I think I've heard a lot of different theories, which is that a lot of folks feel like there aren't enough options or enough choice in the affordable housing world. I've heard that maybe folks are really, really thinking about homeownership and thinking of ways for folks to be able to get into homeownership in an affordable way. But I think in reality, is that the last few years, from I would say like 2018 on, maybe 2016 on, there's just been kind of a sense of maybe hopelessness and sort of a sense that there isn't a way out, and we're all going to end up living in suburban Las Vegas at some point. And I think what land trusts kind of present is kind of a really hopeful solution. It's the idea that you're going to be able to stay in your community forever. And the concept of perpetuity and permanence is really strong in our movement. I think there's also a sense that because of the forces that are moving around the world, both economically and politically, folks feel like they don't have agency and decision-making power. And land trusts offer this ability to be able to have a say over where you live, whether or not you own the home or not. The land trust model includes resident decision-making as part of our bylaws. And so it gives folks a sense more of ownership, whether or not they're equity holders in the property or not. So my sense is really just a sense that folks are really looking for a hopeful solution, and land trusts kind of really offer that potential pathway for folks to be able to have access to some of the things that are considered the American dream.
Well, hope and dreams. What a great way to end our little interview session. Thank you so much, Asn. We'll see you again at the end of the presentation today when we open it up for a larger Q&A to our attendees. And of course, folks can catch Asn tomorrow with an SV at Home policy discussion, as well as Housing California next week. So now I would love to turn it over to our other guest speakers today. As Lavender mentioned, sorry, just finding my other slide here. Okay, Matt Gustafson is the Director of Strategic Development at the Bay Area CLT, and he has 15 years of experience in nonprofit work, specializing in organizing, strategy, and community building. And within the last 5 years, Matt has focused on leading grassroots initiatives with Somos Mayfair in East San Jose, including a citywide anti-displacement policies and cooperative housing strategies. And he did all this while earning his master's in urban planning at San Jose State University. Go Spartans. Regina Mouton is also going to be joining us in a minute here, and she is a resident within a Bay Area CLT property, where she's also served on the board. She is an artist, an educator, and a longtime resident of the East Bay. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt and Regina.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hey, everyone, I'm Matt. If we could pull up the first slide on BACLT, I'm just going to do a quick intro about our organization, and then we'll chat with Regina, who is a resident with Bay Area CLT. So we were founded in 2006 out in Berkeley out of a co-op housing network that pre-existed. The purpose of creating the land trust originally was to ensure that co-ops would be stewarded as long-term affordable resources by and for the community. And so this other entity of the land trust, thankfully, Northern California Land Trust was already around to help start up BACLT. And so we began in 2006. I just wanted to feature 3 different kind of pillars of what makes BACLT's identity unique. One, we really focus on democratic participation. So we have an active membership of over about 230 people, which includes all of our adult residents. Who have decision-making power at all different levels of the organization. We have 1/3 of our board, our residents, and there's 3 additional boards, like alternate seats for residents also. Our co-op program manager, who's just walked into the office here, is also, first and foremost, as they would say, a resident of the land trust. And so I think, integration, we really try to put our money where our mouth is in terms of resident influenced and democratic decision-making within the org. The second thing is cooperative cultivation. So I mentioned co-ops are part of the roots here. Within the first decade of the land trust existing, before we actually had any housing or properties, we were doing a lot of co-op networking, technical assistance, and development and education. And so it's really core to our organization to not just train and teach and help residents in the land trust to create their own co-ops so that they can collectively own the buildings where they live together, but also to support the broader co-op and co-housing and co-living community, because there's really a lot of versions of this out across the East Bay and also just around the Bay Area as a whole. So we're building out some curriculum now to help share around the Bay and also with CLTs across the state, which hopefully will let us see a lot more co-ops in the next couple decades. And then lastly, just the type of acquisitions at this point that we're really focused on, mostly in Berkeley and Oakland, are multifamily buildings to preserve community and really focus on supporting residents that are at imminent risk of displacement, usually because the landlords, longtime landlords of their buildings want to sell the building and they're most likely to get displaced. And so just want to put a pitch out. If you'd like to, we'd love to have you as a member of BACLT if you are digging this presentation. There's other calls for membership also that will happen as part of this presentation. So lots of opportunities to get involved in our Lunch and Learn today. Okay, so that's Bay Area CLT. Now I would love to introduce you to Regina, who is a resident of BACLT, has been around the organization much longer than I have, both as a resident and also a board member. So if we could pull down the slide, well, let's just Okay, let's go to the next slide. Resident perspective with Regina. And the next slide, just so y'all can get a snapshot of this is the place where Regina lives. It's a BACLT property in Berkeley. Okay, now we can pull down the slides and have a conversation with Regina. Hi, Regina.
Hi, Matt.
So if you would please introduce yourself for the group, and then also you can just move right into the first question, which is, why did you look for CLT housing in the first place?
I am a Bay Area native. I was born and raised in San Francisco, so I actually left the Bay Area in 1969 when most of you weren't even born, and then returned to the Bay Area in about a decade later. So throughout that time, gentrification wasn't even a real word. In many communities I'd lived in before I returned, but by the time I moved back to San Francisco, yes, it was afoot. The Bay Area had changed tremendously. And so as part of, I actually moved to the East Bay when I was finishing art school. And so the Bay Area in proximity to the East Bay always has felt like one community to me. And after a trip to New York, I observed how artists got cheap live workspace in outerlying regions. And when I returned to finish up my undergraduate degree, I thought, well, Oakland was a perfect place for that. And so I actually moved to Oakland at a time when it was experiencing a huge cultural renaissance. So over the years, I've lived in many shared properties. I've lived on my own, but by the time I had my son and post the mortgage crises, shared housing just seemed like a way to not only share childcare raising opportunities with other adult members in a really ideal, affordable way, but it also was a way to kind of contribute to a community. And that's really the thread of it that appealed to me at the time. So it was, I think, when the Bay Area Community Land Trust, a friend of mine got a job at the San Francisco Community Land Trust, and they're the ones who actually told me about the property I'm living in now. And that was almost 10 years ago. And when I joined this community, I was joining a community, a property that had been already collective, cooperative since the early 70s in Berkeley as part of a large historic landlord strike. And so actually the members of several more houses than are currently a part of our current collective, but all collectively went on strike, saved their money, and when the judge ruled against the landlords involved, they purchased the property. So I actually joined a well-established culture, which is really distinct from, I think, a lot of the cases of other buildings that become co-ops, have become co-ops since I've been a member of this one. So that has a big degree on how well I've integrated into this community and how comfortable it was for me to find this place. So that's how I found it, sort of.
Yeah, wow, and thank you for sharing a little, context about the place where you lived. It sounds like there was quite a legacy already in that building and amongst some of the residents, and connection with history. And that's really cool. So my other main question for you then, since now that you've lived in a land trust property and been involved with the board of the organization, and been involved in other ways, what has your experience been like? And you share share what you think is helpful, or what's coming up for you right now.
Well, It's been an amazing experience. There's no doubt about it. I could talk about it all day, but I think the most important thing for me is that I was very aware of what I was getting into when I joined up, when we applied, and I joined with another family. So me and my adult son, he was a teenager at the time, but I also joined with a woman who had 2 young children. And as people of color, I knew that we would be ideal candidates in an established collective where there was a lot of homogeneity among the members there. So, and because I had a lot of nonprofit experience, collective living experience, I felt pretty informed about what the opportunity was. In other words, I knew it was going to be a lot of work, but the buildings were comfortable. They're beautiful, and uh, that was my real introduction to. I was aware, so attending meetings, I feel like I was initially very outspoken about how I thought we should be best participating and was really a contributor. Um, I do think that it has gotten easier as we've gotten to know each other. I'm about the same age as a lot of the people in the collective that have been here a while. There is an original member that is my next door neighbor who has lived here since the early 70s.
Wow.
So that's just to give you context. That was one of the things that we felt was a cohesion for us, that we were senior, we were aging. And so when we recently invited new people or canvassed for new people, we were very aware we needed the next generation. Apart from my son, there aren't a lot of young people here. So not everyone is old. There are some middle-aged people here, but we really were looking for the generation for which we are stewarding these buildings to get involved.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing, apart from really being aware of the amount of work that it was going to take, and the commitment to attend the meetings, do the work, get on the committees, do all the background work that needed to be done. I think what is one of the most challenging things for me as an individual, and that we're kind of aware collectively, is burnout. The amount of work that it does take to preserve old buildings. All these buildings are over 100 years old.
Yeah.
And the lack of maintenance that they receive, particularly in the earlier decades of their existence, is just all-sided. It's constant. It's all around upgrading, updating, because we do everything as cheaply as we can. We really prize doing things together to the degree we can. And I think there's just a kind of fatigue that does set in despite the phenomenal rent that we have in this area. You're making up for it in your labor if you want the community to be sustainable and
Yeah.
established. So it's really exciting what what we've been able to do. And I just have one story about the benefits of forming a solid democratic collective. And when we first moved in, the land trust had more or less renovated the building I'm in, pretty superficially, but it was kind of upgraded a bit relative to the other buildings. And in exchange for filling this building in the way that the land trust wanted to, they told the other residents, we will not raise your rent, but we're going to do this. We're going to invite this crew of people, as this is our first property, in our own way. And so that there was always this thing where we paid significantly more rent than other people that had been living there for a while. Not a problem. It was still a wonderful deal. We were still happy about it. But over time, I am the rent collector and deposit the rent every month. it became wearing on me that my rent was more expensive than anyone, or the rents in this building were more expensive. And after a few years, it was sort of like, it's an issue of equity. And so this was not something I initiated. I just complained about it. But another member said, well, why don't we just measure all the units and do a real estate thing and figure out what the going rate is. And as long as we can make up our mortgage payment, we're cool. And by doing that, which I thought was amazing, my other neighbor upstairs resisted it because she has a significantly larger space with a lot of unhousable attic. And so I think she was concerned that she'd be paying a lot more. Well, as it turned out, a couple of the other unit like ours pays significantly more. And the corner house, which is a big shared house, pays a tiny bit more. We pay less. I paid the most less of anyone. My rent was reduced by $400.
Wow.
And that to me was like such a victory of the democratic process, our commitment to equity. And it's just amazing to me that could happen because we had the collective will to make it so. So that's a beautiful victory story. And we don't have to talk about how much work it is other than that.
Well, thank you for acknowledging, Regina, that there is some hard work in there and it's not just all roses and sunshine all the time. I really appreciate your perspective as a resident, and feel like it's really, we can't have these conversations without being honest about what is it actually like to live in CLT housing, and how does it work, and what's the experience on the ground. So thank you for your presence and your time here, and maybe stick around. There may be some questions for you at the end. Thank you, Regina.
Thank you, Matt.
All right. So maybe you're wondering, if you're sitting here listening to this, gee, I would love to live in housing like what Regina's got. So we actually do have a quick bit here about, how do I find CLT housing if I live in the East Bay or the Bay Area? Let's go to the next slide. This will be relatively quick. Maybe you want to take a screenshot. So the three main CLTs that have housing like available on a somewhat regular basis in the East Bay are NCLT, Bay Area CLT, and Oakland Community Land Trust. If you go on their websites, each place has a page for housing opportunities. If there's nothing available, or if you don't happen to get the one that you apply for, you can sign up for a mailing list, and you'll get email notifications whenever each of these organizations has a vacancy. So I would recommend, if you really, really want to live in a CLT, go sign up for all the email lists and just apply as things come to you. If you go to the next slide, there aren't just those three in the East Bay. In fact, as Asn mentioned, there's a whole bunch of CLTs around the Bay Area. And the next slide, here's a map. I hope you can read some of these. There were a whole bunch, and so they're kind of squished in here, but take a screenshot. I don't think we're going to copy paste the full list into the chat, but you can do the email list on any or all of these if you really just want to stay in the Bay Area and live in a CLT. There's a lot out there. And as Asn said, we hear about a new CLT emerging like every month. So there's more in the future. We can be optimistic. So finally, the last little bit we want to share about is just CLT advocacy. Go to the next slide. Asn already mentioned some policies that we advocate for, but I wanted to share a word of advocacy really for CLTs. A lot of it is very locally specific. And so if you live near a CLT or involved with a specific CLT, that's the best way to plug into advocacy. So we share advocacy opportunities in our email newsletters. Other folks do. Sometimes there's Berkeley stuff to advocate for, or Oakland stuff, or Alameda County stuff. The CLTs will tell you what the opportunities are. Opportunity to purchase policies and bonds, local bonds and regional affordable housing bonds have been two specific areas. There probably will be some local affordable housing bonds to advocate for next year. So just stay tuned for those. And now, this wasn't always true, but now those bonds often do include dedicated funds for housing preservation, which is what CLTs do mostly. Finally, there is a lot of statewide advocacy that is done to support CLTs across the state through the California CLT network, which kind of organically sprung up from collaborative partnerships between CLTs in the East Bay several years ago. So the best way to get involved with statewide advocacy is to become a member of the California CLT network, and then you can be notified about statewide policies or lobby days where we go visit politicians in Sacramento in March. So if you want to get involved at the state level, that's your avenue. That's what I have to share. And I think Lindsay might have a question or two.
Yes, thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate learning more about Bay Area CLT, the California CLT network, and really want to thank Regina too for her sharing her experience with us today. It was that was wonderful. So I want to make sure that we have enough time for the general Q&A for our audience members. So I'm just going to ask you one question, and then we'll open it up and Kiki will be helping us with the general Q&A. So my question for you, Matt, is because you're also hitting your 1-year-ish anniversary around now with Bay Area CLT, but before joining Bay Area CLT, you worked with Somos Mayfair in San Jose for over 4 years, and you specifically worked on community opportunity to purchase acts, or COPA. If folks are not familiar with COPA and TOPA, EBHO did a lunch and learn in October of 2024 on TOPA and COPA, and you can go to our website and watch that if you didn't have a chance to watch it in real time. So you worked on a campaign with some outreach specifically and primarily to Spanish-speaking residents in San Jose, and I was wondering if you could share with us, what the East Bay could learn from some of this work that you did in Santa Clara County, organizing work you did around COPA TOPA.
Oh boy, it feels a little presumptuous for me to offer lessons for the East Bay. I've only been living here for 1.5 years, but if we can go back a slide, I did want to share something that was really powerful around the work that we did in San Jose was this image here, the artwork came from a lot of that organizing, and it was created as part of a campaign that we were involved with. And especially the bottom part of this, where it's, gathering around a table, learning together, sharing meals together, building relationships. The community we organized with in San Jose was very tight and relationally, and I think, one thing I don't see as much here is this relationship building, in-person, face-to-face. I'm sure it exists in pockets, and I would say there's tons and tons of organizing happening in the East Bay, and there's a strong legacy of organizing. So I would love to see more of this in-person gathering, relationship building. And I think we're going to really need to lean on this kind of localized mutual support, especially as we head into a very uncertain future that's ahead of us. So that's my one offering.
Great, I really appreciate that. So now we're going to invite Asn to join us again, and Kiki is going to help lead us through Q&A. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and Kiki, I will turn it over to you to manage the Q&A.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'll actually be managing the Q&A.
Oh, sorry, Lavender.
No worries at all. So we will get started with our Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or you could raise your hand and we'll call on you. We do have a few questions that were asked earlier, so we could start with those. Our first one is from Jenny Madsen, who asked, what do people in a CLT have to understand about buying housing? Do any of our guest speakers want to answer this one?
I can get us started. I think there are a lot of resources for the initial transaction, which a lot of folks really focus on, which is kind of the homeowner education program. And it's really about getting you over that hurdle. With the CLT program, or homeownership just generally, we try to think about sort of the long-term stewardship aspect of the home, repairs, sort of major things that could happen to the home. big spikes in costs like insurance, for example. And so we want to make sure that when people get into these homes, they stay in those homes, right? Land trusts have the lowest foreclosure rate of any homeownership model, and part of that is because of that long-term stewardship.
Thank you. So we did have another question in the chat from Brian, who asked, how can local governments partner with CLTs?
I mean, we really love our governmental partners. We currently have quite a few. We have a fairly close relationship with the city of Oakland, the city of Berkeley. We have a long-term loan with the city of San Francisco, with the county of Alameda, and we would love to have even more governmental partnerships. I think one of the big things, I'm sure Matt's could probably chime in on this, just making sure that CLTs are included in funding measures and ballot measures or just general fund allocations, so that we have access with the same access to resources as other affordable housing providers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And Asn, I think one thing I'm thinking about is the Santa Clara County bond that was passed. I think it was 2016. You know, there was some work to get CLTs and co-ops included in that language. And I mean, to be fair, there weren't a lot of co-ops or CLTs at that time in the area, but it does take work to ensure that you know, the policies that created and the funding that's available is accessible and flexible for CLTs because the model is unique and has specific needs.
Yeah, thank you both. So we did have another question in the chat from Gavin, who asked, how can architects better support CLTs in the Bay?
Matt, feel free to chime in here. So we recently had the really great opportunity and challenge of working with architects on our rehab projects. We understand that our rehab projects are fairly small ball most of the time. And so we understand that, you know, the fees aren't that great. But it would be really great, I think, to find a better selection and opportunity for us to be able to have, you know, greater variety of architects that are available who want to work on these kind of rehab projects or these community ownership type of projects. One of the big issues, of course, you know, for any CLT is really having access to contractors who want to work on our projects. And so I think that would be one way for architects to really help. The second thing I would say is for ground up construction, we're looking for innovative or interesting ideas around how we can potentially leverage land to drive affordability.
It's great. I have nothing to add. Thanks, Asn.
All right, great. Joe, I see your hand is raised. Did you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. I have a two-part thing. My first question is, if somebody owns their home, their property, can they turn it into a land trust? And how does one do that if that is a thing? And then I also have some solutions around this, like lack of contractors. There is a thing that's called BNI, which is the Business Network International. And if folks don't know what that is, I highly suggest that we look into it, because that's where we'll find our contractors. We will find our local contractors, people who are running their business locally who want to help with the issue. So BNI has a bunch of chapters all over the Bay Area. And I think it's just something that we should look into if we're looking for contractors to do this work and really tap into the local contracting part of it. So back to my first question is, somebody has a property, how do they turn it into a land trust?
Matt, I'll let you swing at this one, and then I'll add on.
Sure. I mean, you'd have to create a 501c3 structure, and that's how land trusts are organized under the law. And I think you could do it. You'd need legal help depending on where you are. There are different people who could help you out with that. I know we have a lot of local folks here in Berkeley and Oakland and the East Bay who understand the legal ways of incorporating. You could also work with an existing land trust and who could purchase the property, or you could donate the land under your building to the land trust, and then you'd sign a ground lease. And so there's different ways of getting a property preserved under a land trust. And I will say that both NCLT and BACLT have had several property, including the one that Regina lives in, properties donated. Donated in the sense of like, the land is owned by the land trust. The residents pay ground lease fees and things like that to the land trust to help manage. Some of those residents own the building as a cooperative. Some of them rent from the land trust. There's different ways of structuring that. Yeah, Asn, anything to add?
You got it. The only other thing I was going to add is one potential way of doing it, partnering with another land trust, is you only transfer the title to the land. So you're only donating the land so that you continue to own the improvement, so that you make sure that if you want to transfer the property to either a family member or to whoever the next person is in our community, that property can remain affordable.
All right, thank you, Joe, for that question. So we did have one more question from Jeff, who asked, you've talked some about resident management, but I wanted to delve a little deeper, particular for multifamily and co-op situations. How do we ensure that residents remain engaged in management? What kinds of issues have to be dealt with, and how do you handle conflicts? Regina.
I'd love to chime in because we are a resident managed but not owned property. So we do not own the property. We are managers of the property, and we're currently going through a process where we will be setting up eventually an LEHC, a limited equity housing cooperative or something, because as we continue to invest a sizable amount of labor into maintaining the properties and working together, we began to feel that it would be incentivizing to members if we felt like we had some kind of an investment in our units. That's a sort of longer process. It's not like a super immediate goal that we're working to, because we're doing it in stages. But we have been a resident managed, not owned building for a long time. And I think the issues are still pretty similar. How you keep people engaged is making it very clear what membership entails. And that includes meetings, work hours, committee engagement. It has to be required, and we actually tally it up sometimes. Mostly, we don't really tally it up now because we've all been doing it for a while and everybody knows who does what. And in my experience, there are always the people that are going to do a lot, and there are going to be the people who don't do quite as much. And there are ways we try to manage that, but it is a requirement. There are incentives, there are fines for people. We haven't had to use them, but people have come and gone. It isn't for everybody. My housemate and her children moved after 4 years, and it was pretty clear that it wasn't a model for her. But I think that it's a certain kind of person that's willing to do the work for the obvious benefit, and it requires we meet a lot.
Thank you, Regina. All right, so we're at time. I'll just pass it over to Kiki to quickly share some updates about what's next for EBHO. And I wanted to give a huge thank you to our amazing speakers, Matt, Asn, and Regina. But yeah, without further ado, I'll pass it to Kiki.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to wrap this in 1 minute. So I really wanted to highlight what our strategic plan says. It says that our theory of change, we will meet our mission by partnering with our members to deepen our impact in local communities, to shift electoral and policy leadership representation, to fortify the housing justice movement, and to advance systemic policy change. So what does that all mean? It means that we need you. We need these partnerships. We need to keep learning, to keep sharing knowledge and skill set so that we can move the needle, right? It takes all of us. And so again, thank you to Matt, to Asn, to Regina. I hope that everyone has renewed their membership so we can continue this work, continue this partnership. If you want to see more sessions like this, I hope that you join our Lunch and Learn series. It's monthly. Next month, we're going to dig into the strategic plan more and talk more about what we've been doing at EBHO, what's to come for 2025, but we also want to hear your feedback, right? We want to hear from everyone about what you'd like to see. And so this series is recorded. It's on our website. Give us a week or so to get this one up since we have Housing California next week. But we hope to see you at all of the things, right? All of the membership activities, the Lunch and Learns, Affordable Housing Month, and beyond. So thank you everyone so much. I'm going to pop my email into the chat if you have any questions about your membership, about how you want to get involved, or maybe what you want to see at the next Lunch and Learn. Have a beautiful day, everyone. Take care.